They say grief dulls over time, that it changes shape, becoming softer, manageable, like the rounded edges of sea glass, smoothed by years of tides. People like to tell you that. Friends, neighbors, even strangers who can't bear the weight of silence when they look at a widow's face. But they're wrong. It does not soften, it settles, like cold stone at the bottom of your chest. You carry it, you pretend it's lighter, but it's always there. When Robert passed away, 6 years ago now, though sometimes it feels like yesterday, other times like a whole lifetime ago, everyone assumed I would fall apart. I had spent 51 years with that man. 51. More years than many people even get to live. He was my partner, my compass, my tether to the world. And yet, when the funeral ended and the last casserole dish from well-meaning neighbors was returned, I didn't collapse. Because Max was there. Max, my golden retriever, our golden retriever. He wasn't just a dog. He was a promise Robert and I made to each other late in life. Let's get a dog when we retire, Robert had said on one of those evenings when work was heavy and the news was grim. We'll finally have time, a companion to keep us young. So we had. Max had been a gangly, clumsy ball of fur when we brought him home, his paws too big for his body, his tail a weapon of destruction, knocking over lamps, vases, stacks of mail. I'd scold him, and Robert would laugh. He's a growing boy. Let him be. We let him. And when Robert was diagnosed, the stomach cancer that spread with merciless speed, Max became more than a pet. He was a quiet nurse, a shadow, a guardian. He'd rest his head on Robert's lap during long evenings when the pain was sharp and the medication dulled the man I loved into a stranger. Robert would stroke Max's fur and whisper, "Take care of her when I'm gone, boy." Max seemed to understand. When Robert left this world, Max stayed. Those first mornings alone were the hardest. The bed was too wide. The house too silent. My hands, used to preparing 2 cups of coffee, hesitated over a single mug. But Max would be there, sitting patiently by the bedroom door. His brown eyes, so full of understanding it sometimes hurt to meet them, would remind me, get up, keep moving. He needed breakfast, a walk, companionship. Through caring for him, I cared for myself. That's the thing no one understands about older people and their pets. It's not a hobby, not a whim, it's survival. Every morning, Max and I would walk the same route through the neighborhood, down Maple Street where the Henderson twins would wave from their bikes, across the park where Mrs. Alvarez walked her dachshund, Toby, past the library where Robert and I had spent so many Saturdays before tablets and smartphones devoured the world. Max kept me anchored. He forced me to remain part of the rhythm of life. And people noticed. "Eleanor," Mrs. Alvarez would say, "you look so well these days." It wasn't me. It was Max. It was always Max. Even Kevin and Diana, my son and daughter-in-law, saw it at first. They used to visit every Sunday. Kevin would toss a ball for Max in the yard, while Diana sipped her tea and pretended to tolerate the dirt and dog hair. "Mom," Kevin would say with a smile, "he keeps you young." I'd nod. I thought they understood. But time has a cruel way of shifting people's perspectives. As Max aged, so did I. My knees ached. I moved slower. Grocery bags felt heavier. The occasional forgotten stove burner became a topic of concern, not a quirk to laugh off. And Kevin and Diana's smiles grew tighter, less genuine. One Sunday, as Max dozed at my feet and the late autumn sun slanted through the windows, Diana said, "Have you ever thought about Simplifying things, Eleanor. Simplifying. A polite word for downsizing, for surrendering the home Robert and I had built. I brushed it off. I wasn't ready. But I should have realized then the seed had been planted, not just about the house, about Max. Because to them, Max wasn't a lifeline. He was a responsibility, a liability. And in their minds, responsibilities can be reassigned, even stolen. The shift came subtly. They began asking more pointed questions. Isn't it hard managing him on your own? Have you considered that one day you might not be able to? At first, I thought they were simply concerned. After all, wasn't that what children did for aging parents? Worry, offer solutions, try to help. But then came the day when Diana arrived without Kevin. She brought pamphlets, brochures, pet rehoming services for seniors. I remember the chill that gripped my spine, the disbelief. You brought these? I asked, voice tight. Diana nodded. Just options. We're only thinking about your safety, Eleanor. I told her no, firmly. She smiled, that tight, patronizing smile that I would come to despise. Of course, just think it over. I did not think it over. I shredded the brochures, but they had made up their minds. Behind closed doors, away from my ears, they began plotting, and the countdown had begun. It began the way betrayals often do, not with a loud declaration or a slammed door, but with lowered voices, cautious glances, secrets whispered behind closed doors that were once always open. Kevin and Diana had always been welcome in my home. Even after Robert passed, even when their visits grew less frequent, I kept the guest room tidy, fresh flowers on the nightstand, and Max always waiting at the door with that joyful tail wag of his. But lately, something had shifted. They came less as family and more like inspectors. They'd cast their eyes over the rooms as if appraising them. Diana would frown at the rugs, the cluttered shelves, the stacks of mail, and they'd talk in hushed tones when they thought I wasn't listening. One particular afternoon stands out in my mind. The sky was heavy with the promise of rain, the kind that darkened the windows and made the house feel smaller, more intimate. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for a pie. Robert's favorite, apple and cinnamon. Max lay at my feet, his warm weight a familiar comfort. I heard them before I saw them. She left the tap running again, Kevin. Diana's voice, sharp and insistent. Maybe it was just an accident, Kevin replied, though his tone held little conviction. It's a pattern. First the stove, now the tap. What if she forgets to feed Max, or he trips her up on the stairs? She loves that dog, Di. Taking him away would break her. And what if she breaks a hip before that happens? I froze, hands still buried in the soft, pliant dough. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the patter of rain beginning on the windows. Take him away. They were discussing it openly now, not just hinting, planning. Max stirred beneath the table, sensing my tension. His tail thumped once, uncertain. I moved quickly, wiping my hands and stepping into the hallway. The living room door was ajar. I could see Kevin pacing, running a hand through his graying hair. Diana sat rigidly on the couch, a stack of papers in her lap. I found a facility, she was saying. A beautiful community. No pets allowed, of course, but no pets, Kevin repeated. And for a moment, his face softened into doubt. Mom will never agree. Then we don't give her a choice. The breath caught in my throat. For a long, terrible moment, the world seemed to tilt. Max nuzzled my leg gently, grounding me. They wouldn't. But a part of me, the part that had weathered the long, slow erosion of their warmth over the past year, knew they absolutely would. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It was a slow drip, like water wearing down stone. They had started small, taken over my grocery shopping to help, managing my bank app so I didn't have to worry, picking up my prescriptions. At first, it felt like kindness, a son caring for his aging mother, but kindness had turned into control. And now they had decided I was no longer capable, that Max, my anchor, my last true companion, was a danger instead of a blessing. I stepped back quietly before they noticed me, returned to the kitchen. My hands shook as I forced the dough into the pie tin, every movement mechanical. They were wrong. Yes, I moved slower now. Yes, my memory had its lapses. But I was not helpless. I was not finished, and neither was Max. As the rain turned from a gentle patter to a steady roar, I made a decision. I would not let them take him. They thought I was vulnerable. They had forgotten who I was before the gray hair and the wrinkles. Robert's wife, Max's guardian, a woman who had fought through poverty in her youth, through grief in her later years, and who still knew how to stand her ground. That night, after Kevin and Diana left, offering tight smiles and empty reassurances, I sat at the kitchen table long after the house had gone dark. Max rested his head on my foot. I retrieved the manila folder from the drawer in Robert's desk. The will, revised 5 years ago. Robert had insisted, even when I protested it wasn't necessary. "Humor me," he'd said, pressing the pen into my hand. Just in case. Thank God I had listened. Among the clauses about the house, the savings, and my modest pension, there was one line I read over and over until the words blurred. The guardianship of the dog, Max, cannot be transferred or altered without Eleanor Hamilton's explicit consent or that of her designated representative. Any violation shall result in immediate forfeiture of all inheritance rights by the violator. They had no idea, and I wasn't going to tell them, not yet. The leash still hung by the front door, the leather worn smooth by years of use. I touched it gently, a silent promise passing from my fingertips into the loop. "They won't take you, Max," I whispered into the quiet. He stirred, ears perking. "You're not just a pet, you're family, and I will fight for you." Outside, the rain washed the world clean. Inside, the battle had only just begun. The days that followed were heavy with an uneasy calm, the kind that settles over a house before a storm. I could feel it in the air, sharp and brittle. Max sensed it too. He had stopped running to the door at the sound of approaching cars. Instead, he lingered by my side wherever I moved, his amber eyes watchful, serious. I kept to our routines, though every step felt fragile, like treading on thin ice. Morning walks through the neighborhood, meals at the same times, quiet evenings by the fireplace with Max's head on my knee. I held to those rituals with the desperate grip of someone who knows they are already living in borrowed time. Then, on a Thursday, they came. It was just past noon. The sky was pale and cloudless, but the sharp wind carried the scent of winter's approach. I had just returned from the backyard, where Max had been chasing a sluggish squirrel up the old oak tree. His enthusiasm had made me laugh, truly laugh, for the first time in weeks. The sound of tires on gravel silenced my joy. A sleek silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Kevin stepped out first. His face was tight with something between determination and discomfort. Diana followed, clutching a clipboard, and behind them, another woman emerged. A stranger, mid-40s, professionally dressed, her brown hair twisted into a severe bun. She carried a black bag and wore the kind of expression that spoke of experience dealing with difficult elderly clients. Max growled softly at my side. I straightened my spine, shoulders back, heart thundering but steady. Kevin approached, hands up in a mock gesture of peace. "Mom, we need to talk." I didn't move. "So talk." Diana stepped forward before he could speak. "This is Ms. Janet Wilkes from Adult Protective Services. We've asked her to assess the situation here." Assess? The word felt like a stone dropped into cold water. What situation? Janet offered a smile so polished it felt plastic. "Mrs. Hamilton, your son and daughter-in-law have expressed concerns about your ability to care for yourself and for Max." At the sound of his name, Max's growl deepened. I rested a hand on his head. "There is no situation here. You've wasted her time." Janet continued as if she hadn't heard. "They've noticed signs of memory lapses, physical strain. They worry about your safety." "I worry about my safety too," I replied. "That's why I locked the doors behind you." Kevin's face tightened. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Diana took over. "We're only thinking of what's best for you. For Max. He needs stability. You've had a few incidents. A stove left on once, a tap left running once." My voice was cold steel now. "Minor slips." "They add up," Diana insisted. "Not to neglect." Janet raised her clipboard. "With your permission, I'd like to walk through the home. Observe." "No." The word came sharp and final. "This is my home. You have no right." Diana's lips parted, ready to protest, but Janet held up a hand. "Mrs. Hamilton, if we receive reports of a hazard and the resident refuses assessment, the next step is to involve legal channels." I smiled then, not kindly, not warmly, the kind of smile that Robert once described as my lioness expression. "I suggest you do just that." Kevin's frustration broke through his carefully neutral mask. "Why are you being so stubborn?" "Because this isn't about safety." My voice did not waver. "It's about control, about convenience. For you, not for me." Diana's face flushed. "That's not fair." "What's not fair is planning to take away my dog, my family, under the pretense of caring." Janet, sensing the conversation slipping from her script, cleared her throat. "We have a foster family prepared to take Max. They've already passed the required checks." At that, Max barked. Once, loud, clear. It felt like agreement. "You went that far?" My eyes snapped to Kevin and Diana. Kevin's gaze faltered. "It's temporary. Just until we get things sorted." "You mean until you move me into whatever facility you've chosen?" Diana's expression hardened. "It's for your safety, Mom." "No, it was for their freedom, their convenience, their inheritance, and they thought I was too blind to see it." Before another word could be exchanged, two men appeared from around the side of the house. Uniformed. Animal Transport Service. They carried leads and crates. Max stiffened. "No." My breath felt trapped in my chest. "You are not taking him." Janet glanced at the men. "Mrs. Hamilton, refusal to comply could result in escalation." I didn't move. Max pressed against my legs, trembling but ready to defend. Kevin stepped closer. "Mom, don't do this. You're making it worse for yourself." It wasn't just a visit. It was an ambush. I was outnumbered, legally outmaneuvered. But I wasn't outwitted. The leash, his leash, hung behind me on the wall. I reached for it slowly, deliberately. My hand closed around the leather loop. "This leash," I said softly, "represents 24,000 mornings together, thousands of walks, hundreds of nights when he guarded this home while I slept. He is not just a pet. He is the last promise your father and I made to each other." The men hesitated. Janet didn't. "Take the dog." They advanced. Max barked, teeth bared, but I dropped to my knees and gathered him close, wrapping the leash around my wrist like a shield. "If you take him," I said quietly, "you violate the will." Everything froze. "What?" Kevin's voice cracked. Diana blinked. "What will?" Janet frowned. I stood slowly, drawing myself up to my full height. My heart raced, but my voice was steady. "My late husband and I amended our will years ago. Max's guardianship cannot be altered without my explicit consent. Any unauthorized transfer forfeits inheritance rights." I met Kevin's eyes. "Did you forget who taught you to read contracts?" He paled. "Mom, you didn't think I knew what you were planning, but I did. From the moment you brought those brochures into my kitchen." Janet opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "You and your clipboard can leave. Now." The animal transport men looked to her, uncertain. Janet hesitated. "If there's a legal document involved, we'll need to review. Not in my house, not today." Kevin's shoulders slumped. Diana's face flushed with fury. But the battle, for now, was over. They left. Max stayed. That night, I sat by the fire, Max's head heavy on my knee. The shadows danced on the walls, familiar and comforting. But I knew this was only the first skirmish. The real war had just begun. The morning after the visit, the house felt different. Not just quieter. Silence had long been a familiar companion, but heavier, like the air itself carried the weight of what had happened, of what was still to come. Two strangers who saw Max not as my companion, but as a logistical problem to be removed and solved. I knew what would happen next. They'd regroup, strategize. Maybe they'd return with a court order, or attempt to declare me mentally unfit. The words Diana had used, incidents, hazards, were not chosen at random. They were the first bricks in a legal case, carefully stacked one atop the other. If I didn't prepare, the next knock at my door might not be Janet and her clipboard. It might be officers. Or worse. They might simply wait until I left the house and take Max in my absence. My breath caught at the thought. My legs went weak, and I gripped the edge of the counter until the wave of panic passed. No, I wouldn't let them. I was old, not stupid. That afternoon, I called Mr. Ellison. Robert had trusted him implicitly, and so did I. A family attorney in the truest sense, not some sleek, soulless professional who saw clients as billable hours, but a man who had attended Robert's funeral, cried real tears, and sent Christmas cards every year without fail. When I explained what had happened, he didn't sound surprised. "I was wondering when they'd make a move," he said quietly. "They've been inquiring about the house title for months." I felt a cold sting in my chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because the inquiries weren't illegal. Not until now. And I wanted to see what they'd attempt. Unfortunately, this is more common than you'd think, Eleanor." His voice softened. "But you and Robert were smart. That clause about Max, it's solid. Not only does it protect him, it protects you. Anyone who violates it forfeits their claim to your estate." I exhaled slowly, relief mingled with dread. "I need more than a clause now," I said. "I need a plan." And so the plan was made. Mr. Ellison would formally notify Kevin and Diana of the breach. He'd remind them, in no uncertain terms, of the will's stipulations and the legal penalties for further interference. He would also draft a cease and desist order regarding any future attempts to remove Max. Finally, he would initiate proceedings to grant me additional protections against guardianship claims. "It's a lot of paperwork," he warned, "and it might escalate things. I'm ready. I'll come by tomorrow morning. We'll file everything together." I hung up the phone, hands trembling. Not from fear this time, but from the adrenaline of taking back control. Max sat watching me, head tilted. I knelt beside him, fingers threading through his fur. "It's for our safety, sweetheart." That night, sleep was elusive. I lay awake, listening to the old house settle. Every groan of wood, every sigh of the wind outside felt like a reminder of what I stood to lose. But when I finally drifted off, Max curled against me, warm and steady. The world might come for us again, but we would meet it together. The next morning, I opened the front door to retrieve the newspaper and found an envelope wedged between the screen and the doorframe. No stamp, no address, just my name, scrawled in Kevin's unmistakable handwriting. My stomach tightened as I unfolded the paper inside. "Mom," it read, "please reconsider. We're trying to help you. Don't let stubbornness ruin what's left of our family. This isn't about inheritance. It's about your well-being. Let Max go. Let Max go." As if he were a burden, a possession, something disposable. As if the bond between us could be severed with a few patronizing words. I crumpled the letter and dropped it into the trash. By the time Mr. Ellison arrived, I was ready. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Robert once did taxes and balanced checkbooks, where Max now lay quietly at my feet. Mr. Ellison spread out the papers, legal documents, letters of notice, the cease and desist order. He passed me a pen. "Your signature here will start the process." I signed without hesitation. The storm was coming, but so was justice. And this time, I would not be the one to back down. That afternoon, after Mr. Ellison left and the official papers were safely tucked into my desk drawer, I stood by the front door for a long time. The leash hung there where it always had. Brown leather, worn smooth from years of walks, coiled neatly around the brass hook Robert had installed himself. I stared at it. My fingers itched to grab it, to snap it onto Max's collar, and to walk out the door like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The leash now represented more than daily strolls around the neighborhood or early morning park visits. It had become a line in the sand, a symbol of defiance, proof that even as my body aged and my family plotted behind my back, I still had control over at least one thing, the bond between Max and me. I reached out, letting my fingers trace the leather. It felt warm, familiar, a silent witness to every moment we had shared. "You ready for our walk, boy?" I asked softly. Max lifted his head from where he rested near the fireplace. His ears perked up, and his tail gave a hopeful thump against the hardwood floor. That's what made dogs different from people. People lied, they pretended, they schemed. But dogs stayed true, even when the world turned against you, even when the people you had loved and nurtured forgot who you were, or worse, remembered and decided you were inconvenient. I took down the leash, snapped it onto Max's collar, and we stepped outside. The sky was clear but cold, the first true chill of the approaching winter pressing against my cheeks. The sidewalk stretched ahead of us, just like it had for years. As we walked, I noticed how little things had shifted. The Henderson twins didn't wave from their bikes anymore. They had outgrown childish greetings and perhaps outgrown the old woman with the dog. Mrs. Alvarez was missing from her usual bench, probably inside, waiting out the cold. Even the librarian, who used to smile and wave through the window as Max and I passed, seemed absent today. It struck me then, the isolation wasn't accidental. It was the natural erosion of time, of aging. Friends moved, neighbors passed away. Young families filled the gaps, polite but distant. And when the world around you shrank, it became easier for others to make decisions for you, to take what little you had left. We rounded the park and paused beneath the old oak tree, the same one Robert and I had picnicked under when we were newlyweds, before Kevin was even a thought in our minds. Max sat beside me, tail sweeping the grass, watching a squirrel dart up the trunk. "I'm not giving you up," I said, voice hoarse, not without a fight. Max leaned against my leg, a heavy, comforting weight. We stayed like that for a long time, just an old woman and her dog, standing against the quiet tides of change. By the time we returned home, the sun had begun to set. The sky blushed pink and gold, the kind of sunset that made you believe, even for a moment, that everything might be all right. But the moment we stepped onto the porch, I saw the white envelope wedged into the doorframe again. Another letter, Kevin's handwriting. I didn't open it, not right away. Instead, I brought Max inside, removed his leash, and hung it back on its hook. Then, hands steady despite the rapid beat of my heart, I unfolded the letter. "Mom," it read, "we're trying to be reasonable, but if you continue to refuse assistance, we will have no choice but to pursue legal guardianship. This isn't personal. It's for your safety. Let Max go." My breath left me in a slow, controlled exhale. It's for your safety. How many times had I heard those words now? Each time they were uttered, they stripped a little more of my autonomy away. What they really meant was, it's for our convenience. They weren't protecting me. They were preparing to erase me. My hand tightened around the letter until the paper crumpled. "No," I whispered. "Not this time." I crossed the room, retrieved Mr. Ellison's cease and desist letter from the drawer, and placed it next to Kevin's threat. 2 pieces of paper, one of betrayal, one of defense. Then I dialed Mr. Ellison. He answered on the second ring. "I got another letter," I said. "They're threatening guardianship." There was a pause. "That's faster than I expected. What do we do?" "We counter. I'll draft an official response tonight. By morning, they'll receive a formal warning. If they proceed, they risk voiding all claims to your estate. And Max? He stays exactly where he belongs." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a breath of relief. But the reprieve was brief, because even as I hung up the phone, I knew Kevin and Diana weren't bluffing. They would push harder, they would escalate, and when they did, the leash on the wall would no longer be enough to protect what mattered most. The real battle was only beginning. That night, the house felt emptier than ever before. It wasn't just the quiet. I had known quiet for years. Since Robert's passing, I had become intimately familiar with the kind of silence that fills the spaces between tick-tocks of the clock, between passing cars outside, between sighs that have no one left to hear them. But now, the quiet was different, heavier, like a warning. Max curled at my feet as I sat in my armchair by the fire. The flames flickered, casting soft shadows against the walls. Shadows where once, years ago, there had been laughter, conversation, and the clink of Robert's coffee spoon against his favorite ceramic mug. I closed my eyes, listening not to the room, but to the absence of certain sounds. No Kevin's voice calling, "Mom, do you need anything?" No Diana's polite, practiced smile. No running feet of grandchildren who never came anymore. And soon, perhaps, no Max. The thought struck hard and sudden. My breath hitched in my throat, and I leaned forward, pressing my palms against my knees. "No," I whispered into the dark. "I won't let it happen." Max stirred, lifting his head, his soft brown eyes locking with mine. Dogs don't understand legal battles or inheritance clauses, but they understand mood, they understand fear, and they understand love. Max knew I was afraid, and he wanted me to know I wasn't alone. "You've always protected me," I said, stroking the fur between his ears. "Now it's my turn." But what could I really do? I thought back to the meeting with Mr. Ellison, his firm confidence, the papers I had signed, the cease and desist, the clause in Robert's will that would disinherit Kevin and Diana completely if they continued down this path. I had done everything right, everything a reasonable person could do, but they weren't being reasonable. Guardianship. The word haunted me. If they succeeded in convincing a judge I was unfit, they could take control of my finances, my house, and yes, Max. I had the will, yes, but courts were unpredictable, and clever lawyers could twist facts, paint me as forgetful, fragile, and emotionally unstable. They could argue that my love for Max clouded my judgment, that I was stubborn to the point of self-destruction, that what I called loyalty was, in fact, delusion. I wasn't just fighting my children now. I was fighting a system that had already decided I was past my prime, past my usefulness. My body might have slowed. My hands might tremble on cold mornings. My memory might stumble over names or dates. But my mind was still my own. And it told me one simple, undeniable truth. If I wanted to protect Max, I couldn't rely solely on lawyers and legal clauses. I needed to prepare for the worst, because Kevin and Diana wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. I spent the next morning drafting a list, not groceries or chores. Those lists belonged to the woman I had been 5, 10 years ago. This was a list for survival. Update emergency contact with veterinarian. Provide Mr. Ellison with copies of Max's medical records. Install new locks on all doors and windows. Notify Mrs. Alvarez to call the police if she sees anyone taking Max without my consent. Prepare a safe bag, essentials in case of sudden removal or court-mandated relocation. By noon, I had completed every item except the locks. The locksmith arrived at 2. He was young, barely older than Kevin had been when he first left for college. His name was Ethan, polite, efficient, but without that forced patience some young men adopted when dealing with the elderly. "You've had break-ins before?" he asked as he examined the front door. "No," I replied, "but I believe someone might try." He nodded, as if that was all the explanation he needed. By 3 o'clock, every door and window had reinforced locks, the kind that would make even seasoned burglars think twice. I stood at the threshold as Ethan packed up his tools. "If anyone tries to force entry," he said, "they'll have to call the fire department to get through." I thanked him, paid in cash, watched him drive away. Then I turned back to the house. Our house, Robert's and mine, and now Max's. "They'll have to call the fire department." That thought brought a grim sense of satisfaction. Let Kevin and Diana try. Let them escalate. Let them involve courts and petitions and all the bureaucracy they could summon. This was my fortress now. Max padded up beside me, tail wagging softly. "Good boy," I said, ruffling his fur. "We're ready." But the nights remained the hardest. At bedtime, Max curled on his blanket beside the bed, but I could feel his unease. He lifted his head at every sound: a car passing outside, the creak of settling wood, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. In the past, these sounds had been part of the comforting tapestry of home. Now, they were threats, or reminders of them. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw visions of Max being taken away, of strangers pulling him from the house, of cold, impersonal rooms where he would wait for me, confused, betrayed, and alone. I rose at dawn, my heart pounding. Max stood instantly, alert. "It's all right," I lied. "Just a bad dream." But it wasn't just a dream. It was the future Kevin and Diana wanted for us, unless I stopped them. By sunrise, I had made my decision. Legal defenses were important. Locks were important. But I needed witnesses, allies, someone besides Mr. Ellison who could vouch for me, for us, someone the courts would listen to. Because this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about proving, beyond doubt, that I was still capable, that I was still Max's rightful guardian, that I was still me. The letter went out on a Monday. Mr. Ellison called at exactly 9 a.m. to confirm he had sent it. Certified mail to both Kevin and Diana, with copies to their attorney. A man named Stephen Brooks, whom I had never met, but who, according to Ellison, was very capable at making bad ideas sound reasonable. Max sat by the window as I spoke, his head resting on the sill, eyes following the cars that passed the house. He knew something important was happening. I could feel it in his posture, the slight stiffness in his muscles, the alertness in his gaze. "They'll have it by noon," Ellison said. "The cease and desist is clear. Any further attempts to remove Max or any move toward guardianship without new medical evidence will be considered a violation of the will's terms. And if they ignore it, they won't. Not openly. If they do, they forfeit everything." I closed my eyes and pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "You don't sound confident." "I'm confident about the law," he replied, "not about your family's respect for it." He was right to doubt. People who scheme to take what isn't theirs rarely stop when they hear the word no. I had given them a chance. I had allowed them room to come to their senses, to recognize that what they were doing wasn't concern, it was greed, dressed up in the costume of responsibility. But they hadn't stopped. I wasn't sure they even knew how. By midday, the mail truck rolled up to my driveway. Max barked once and trotted to the door, tail stiff. I opened it just as the mailman, old Mr. Calloway, stepped up the porch. He handed me a bundle, bills, a catalog I hadn't ordered, and 2 thick stamped envelopes. "Certified letters," he said, a sympathetic crease in his brow. "Everything all right, Mrs. Hamilton?" I smiled. "Everything's fine, Peter. Just family business." He nodded, not convinced, but polite enough not to press. He'd known Robert and me since we moved here 50 years ago. He knew what family could mean, both the comfort and the weight of it. I took the envelopes inside. The first was from Mr. Ellison, a copy of the letter he had sent. I didn't need to read it again. I knew the wording by heart. To Kevin and Diana Hamilton, this notice serves as formal communication that any further attempt to alter the living arrangements or guardianship status of Max Hamilton, or to seek legal guardianship over Eleanor Hamilton without explicit consent or newly provided, court-approved medical evidence, constitutes a violation of the inheritance clause within the will of Robert Hamilton, deceased. Such a violation will result in immediate and permanent forfeiture of all claims to the estate, properties, and trusts held by Eleanor Hamilton. The second envelope was thinner, not from Ellison, from Brooks, the attorney representing Kevin and Diana. I opened it carefully. Dear Mrs. Hamilton, I am writing to acknowledge receipt of the cease and desist notice drafted by Mr. Ellison. Please be assured that my clients, Kevin and Diana Hamilton, have no intention of acting against the law or your wishes. They have, however, expressed ongoing concerns regarding your well-being and will be seeking a medical evaluation to determine your current cognitive and physical capacity to care for yourself and for Max. We hope to resolve this matter amicably and with full respect for all parties involved. I lowered the letter slowly. Respect. That word again. A mask. A cover. I read between the lines easily. Kevin and Diana wouldn't risk violating the will outright, but they had found another path. A medical evaluation. One that could be manipulated. One that could declare me unfit, despite the reality of my clarity and competence. They were determined to win, and I was determined not to let them. Max nudged my leg gently. He always knew when I needed grounding. Well, boy, I said softly, the gloves are off. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Mr. Ellison. They're pushing for a medical evaluation. I expected as much, he replied. We'll counter it. I'll arrange for an independent evaluator, someone with no ties to them. And if the court picks someone of their choosing, then we contest it. We'll need witnesses, people who can testify to your state of mind and physical ability. Witnesses. That was my second phone call. Mrs. Alvarez, I asked when she answered. Her warm, familiar voice came through. Eleanor, are you all right? I might need a favor, a statement about me and Max. She didn't hesitate. Of course, whatever you need. I called others too. Margaret, my neighbor from 3 houses down, who saw Max and me walk every morning. Sam, the pharmacist, who watched me pick up my medications personally and exchange polite conversation without ever showing signs of confusion or distress. Even the manager at the pet store where I bought Max's food and supplies. All agreed, all understood. Some even shared stories of their own, parents or grandparents who had faced similar betrayals disguised as care. By the time the sun set that evening, I had assembled a small army. Max sensed my new purpose. He followed me room to room, quiet but alert, as I gathered documents, made lists, and prepared statements. This wasn't just about stopping Kevin and Diana anymore. It was about setting a precedent, about showing them, and anyone who thought to take advantage of age and trust, that not all seniors went quietly into the roles others assigned them. That night, I lit the fire and sat with Max at my side. I stared into the flames and thought of Robert. Take care of her when I'm gone, boy. He had given Max that charge. Now, I returned the favor. I'll take care of him, Robert, I whispered into the crackling hush. I'll take care of both of us. The lawyer's letter was only the beginning. The next battle loomed, and I was ready. By the following week, It wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a chess game. Every day brought a new move from Kevin and Diana's side. A polite but insistent email from their lawyer. A letter requesting that I accept the court's proposed doctor for my mental evaluation. A visit from a social worker who just wanted to chat. But every piece they moved, I had already anticipated. And in the middle of the board, the piece they couldn't touch was Max. He remained my constant, my anchor. When the social worker arrived, a young woman named Jenna, who couldn't have been more than 25, Max sat quietly beside me in the parlor. His calm presence seemed to unnerve her more than any hostility could have. "Mrs. Hamilton," she began, her tablet balanced on her lap. "This isn't a formal interview. We just want to understand your situation, how you're managing." "I manage," I replied, folding my hands in my lap. "As you can see." Her eyes flicked to Max. "And the dog? He's quite large." "I understand your son and daughter-in-law are concerned about the risk of falls." Max, sensing the attention, wagged his tail once. A quiet, measured gesture, almost like a smirk. I smiled. "Max is no risk. He's my guardian, my family, and frankly, I've stumbled over misplaced shoes more often than over him." Jenna chuckled despite herself, then quickly composed her expression. "We do have to take into account age-related decline, Mrs. Hamilton. These evaluations are standard." "They may be standard," I said, my voice firm, "but they are not obligatory without my consent or a court order. And given that any such evaluation must adhere to the terms of my late husband's will, I suggest you review that document before proceeding further." Her brows knitted in confusion. "I was told the will only pertains to inheritance." "No," I corrected gently. "It contains a clause specifying that any attempt to alter the guardianship of Max without my consent or a court's ruling based on legitimate medical evidence will void the inheritance rights of those involved." That caught her attention. "I wasn't informed of that." "Then someone is withholding information. I suggest you speak with your supervisors." Jenna flushed, quickly making a note on her tablet. I'll need to review the documents." "You're welcome to contact my attorney, Mr. Ellison. He's expecting your inquiry." The interview ended shortly after. Jenna left the house, looking less like a confident bureaucrat and more like a young woman who had just realized she'd stepped into something far more complicated than she'd been briefed on. As soon as the door closed behind her, I sagged back into my chair. Max nudged my leg gently. I reached down, fingers threading through his fur. "You're my best witness," I whispered, "but I hope they won't make me prove it." By that evening, Mr. Ellison confirmed that the social worker had indeed contacted him. He sounded satisfied. "She was unaware of the clause," he said, "which tells me Brooks is keeping his own team in the dark, probably to avoid scaring them off, but now they know. And Kevin? He's received a formal reminder of the clause's consequences. Deanna, too." I thought of my son then, my little boy who once carried frogs in his pockets and asked me to explain why the sky was blue. My son who, when Robert had been diagnosed with cancer, had promised me, "We'll get through this together, Mom." Where had that boy gone? Now he was a man who saw me as a line item on a balance sheet. But the past couldn't save me now. Sentimentality was a luxury for those who didn't have to fight for their dignity. Mr. Ellison continued, "They have two options, Eleanor. back down or push forward, and I suspect they'll choose the latter. I'm ready. And your witnesses? I've gathered statements from Mrs. Alvarez, Margaret, Sam the pharmacist, and others. I've also started a journal documenting my daily routines, evidence that I'm managing. Excellent. But if they force a court battle, I said quietly, I want to countersue for emotional distress. There was a pause on the line. Then, understood. I'll prepare the paperwork. The next days passed in a blur of preparations. Max and I kept to our routines, though now I carried my phone with me at all times, ready to record any interaction that might become evidence. I installed a small camera by the front door, not for strangers, for my own family. I didn't trust them not to escalate. Every morning, I added a new entry to my journal. Max and I walked 1.3 miles. He responded to commands without issue. I navigated uneven sidewalks without assistance. Managed groceries without confusion. Paid by credit card. Reviewed receipts. Prepared meals. Took medications as prescribed. No lapses. Day after day, proof stacked up. Evidence of my competence. But even as I documented, doubt crept in at night. What if the court didn't care? What if they decided, as so many did, that age itself was a disqualifier, that despite all evidence, my desire to keep Max was a symptom of attachment, not clarity? Max sensed my anxiety. He'd rest his head on my lap and sigh deeply, as if to say, we'll get through this too. One evening, as the fire crackled and the shadows danced on the walls, I found myself speaking aloud to Robert. I never thought it would come to this, I whispered. Our son, our family. You always said we raised him to be kind, to protect, not to take. Max shifted, sensing the change in my tone. I stroked his fur, tears pricking my eyes. I'll fight, Robert. I'll fight for Max, for myself, for the life we built. But sometimes, I paused, voice trembling. Sometimes I wish you were still here to stand beside me. Max licked my hand gently. No words, just presence. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't standing alone, not with Max, not with the neighbors who had stepped forward, not with Mr. Ellison, not even with Robert, whose foresight had written that precious clause into the will. I had allies, and I had strength. They would have to rip Max from my arms before I surrendered him willingly. And even then, I would not go quietly. It happened sooner than anyone expected. Despite the lawyer's letters, despite the cease and desist, despite the witnesses and the will clause hanging over their heads like a guillotine blade. They came for Max, and they did not come openly this time. Cowards never do. It was early morning. Fog clung to the streets like a living thing. The world outside my window looked blurred and uncertain, the street lamps haloed in mist. I had just returned from our walk, shorter than usual because of the damp chill, and was toweling off Max's paws in the mudroom. He stood patiently, tail wagging softly, his eyes trusting, oblivious to the storm that gathered around us. I heard the noise then, a soft click, the unmistakable sound of the back gate unlatching. Max's ears perked up instantly. His body went stiff beneath my hands. I froze. The fog pressed close against the windows. I couldn't see beyond the small patch of grass leading to the back alley, but I knew every creak and shift of this house. I knew what that sound meant. Someone was inside the fence. Max let out a low growl. I dropped the towel and reached instinctively for my phone, always in my pocket now, as Mr. Ellison had advised. I didn't dial anyone. Instead, I activated the camera. And then, heart pounding but legs steady, I opened the mudroom door just a crack. Through the fog, two figures emerged near the shed. One male, one female, Kevin, and a woman I didn't recognize. Not Diana. The woman was younger, early 20s maybe, slim build, clipboard in hand. Animal control, I realized with a sick twist of recognition. She wore the county badge on her jacket. I stepped outside fully now, the phone held openly in my hand. Kevin froze when he saw me. His face went pale, his mouth opened, but no words came out. The woman didn't pause. She stepped forward, reciting from her clipboard. Mrs. Hamilton, under subsection 12 of the county's Animal Welfare and Elder Care Act, we have the authority to remove the dog, Max, due to reported negligence and potential hazard. I am recording this, I interrupted coldly. The woman hesitated, eyes darting to the phone. You are trespassing, I continued. This is private property. You have no warrant. Kevin finally found his voice. Mom, please, don't make this difficult. You've already made it difficult, I said. By violating a legal cease and desist, by attempting an unauthorized seizure of property, because Max is legally considered property under the law, and by acting without a court order. The young woman shifted uncomfortably. Your son has petitioned for temporary custody, which has not been granted, I snapped. And until it is, this is an unlawful action. Max stood at my side now, silent but alert. I suggest, I continued, that you both leave immediately before I call the police. This is being recorded. This footage will be provided to my attorney and, if necessary, entered as evidence in a lawsuit. Kevin's face crumpled. We didn't want it to come to this. Then you should have thought twice before breaking the law. The woman tugged Kevin's sleeve. She's right. We can't take him without a court order. Not after that letter her lawyer sent. Kevin stared at me, eyes wide, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Not as the frail old woman he wanted me to be, but as what I truly was, a force to be reckoned with. They left, without another word, without Max. I waited until the back gate clicked shut behind them. Then I sank down onto the cold, damp steps of the mudroom, my strength finally giving out. Max licked my face gently. We did it, I whispered into his fur. We stood our ground. But victory was a hollow thing, because I knew Kevin and Diana would not stop here. This was not the end. It was the beginning of a much darker phase. By noon, Mr. Ellison had the video. I sent it to him as soon as my hands stopped shaking enough to operate the phone. When he called me back, his voice was tight, with barely restrained fury. This is criminal trespass, attempted unlawful seizure. They've crossed the line, Eleanor. What do we do now? We escalate. I'm filing a restraining order against both Kevin and Diana, and the county will receive a formal complaint against the animal control officer. That young woman should never have been part of this. She acted without proper authority. And if they try again, they won't. But I wasn't so sure, because when people become desperate, when they see their carefully laid plans unravel, they don't become rational. They become dangerous. That evening, I sat by the fire with Max curled at my feet. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt a terrible, hollow sadness. Kevin hadn't even looked ashamed. He had looked desperate, like a gambler whose last chips had been swept from the table. And I knew, deep down, that his next move would not be legal papers or polite negotiations. It would be something reckless, something final. But whatever came, I was ready. I would not back down. Not now, not ever. The day after the trespass, the sky turned heavy and low, a blanket of dense clouds pressing against the rooftops. The air smelled like cold earth and rain, though none had fallen yet. It was the kind of weather Robert used to call thinking weather. "You can't hurry decisions in the fog," he'd say, standing at the kitchen window with his morning coffee. "The world slows down for a reason." But there was no slowing now. There was only the inevitable next step. By mid-morning, Mr. Ellison filed the restraining order. The paperwork was thick, layered with every violation Kevin and Diana had committed. The unlawful attempt to seize Max, the trespass, the refusal to honor the cease and desist, the psychological pressure. "This is no longer a family matter," Mr. Ellison said, his voice tight. "It's a legal siege." "And the restraining order?" I asked. "It will be served by this afternoon. They won't be allowed within 100 feet of you or the property. If they try again, they'll face criminal charges." I wanted to feel relief. I truly did. But instead, I felt a bone-deep sorrow. This was my son, my flesh and blood, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the boy who once swore, at Robert's funeral, that he would protect me. And now, a court would order him to stay away, because he had chosen ambition over love, convenience over loyalty. Max pressed his head into my lap as I ended the call. I stroked his fur absent-mindedly, staring out the window at the silent street. Then the phone rang again. Unknown number. I hesitated. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. Most unknown calls lately had brought nothing but stress. Solicitors, legal notices, Kevin's attorney. But something urged me to answer. I lifted the receiver. "Hello?" A pause, then Kevin's voice. Low, hesitant, weary. "Mom." I almost hung up, but some stubborn, aching part of my heart held me back. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice didn't tremble. I'm sorry." His words rushed out in a breathless, desperate stream. "I know I crossed a line. I know Diana and we pushed too far." "You didn't push," I said flatly. "You tried to steal. You violated the law. You lied. Don't dress it up as a mistake." "I thought I was doing the right thing." His voice cracked. "We're drowning, Mom. You don't know—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't you dare make this about your financial mess. Don't tell me you did it for me." There was silence on the line. Then softer. "I miss Dad. I miss how things used to be. And I thought if we had the house, the money, we could fix everything." I closed my eyes. The fog outside the window seemed to seep into the room, blurring the edges of my memories. "You can't fix what's broken by breaking more," I whispered. Kevin inhaled sharply. "I won't fight anymore. I swear. Diana, she's furious with me, but I can't keep doing this. I can't lose you entirely." My heart ached. God, how it ached. But I didn't answer, because this wasn't over. Not yet. "I need time," he continued. "Please, don't go through with the restraining order." "You had time," I said. "Months of it, and every time you chose deceit." "Just a meeting," he pleaded. "One meeting, no lawyers. Just you, me, and Max." I opened my eyes. The fog had thickened outside. The world looked as if it were holding its breath. Max rested his head more heavily in my lap, his eyes watching me steadily. "You can't see him," I said quietly. "That right has been forfeited." "Mom, please." But it wasn't the pleading that stopped me from hanging up. It was the fear, not fear of Kevin, fear of what he might do next. Desperate people don't stop because you say no. They just change tactics. And his call, his sudden shift from aggression to sorrow, wasn't remorse. It was strategy. "I'm ending this call now," I said, "and if you contact me again directly, I'll inform the police. All communication goes through Mr. Ellison." "Mom," I hung up. My hand trembled as I set the phone down. Max lifted his head, licking my wrist gently. "I know," I whispered. "It's not over. Not yet." I called Mr. Ellison immediately, recounting the conversation. He listened carefully. "You did the right thing, Eleanor," he said when I finished. This wasn't an apology. It was a fishing expedition. He wanted to see if he could talk you down or get you alone. He mentioned a meeting, no lawyers. Exactly. Mr. Ellison's tone hardened. Classic manipulation. He's trying to get around the legal restrictions before they take full effect. So what now? We proceed. I'll inform the judge of his attempt to circumvent the restraining order before it's even finalized. It will strengthen our case. And if he tries something else, then we'll be ready. But even as he spoke, a chill passed through me, because I knew Kevin, and I knew desperation hadn't made him stop. It had made him more dangerous. The fog pressed closer to the windows. Max laid his head back down. I didn't tell Mr. Ellison what I feared most, that the next move wouldn't be legal at all, that Kevin wouldn't call or write or email, that the next time he came for Max, he wouldn't knock. The restraining order was officially served the next morning. Mr. Ellison arrived in person, a rare gesture that told me just how seriously he was taking the turn of events. He stepped out of his car with his usual briefcase and a large manila envelope under his arm. His coat was dusted with raindrops. The drizzle had returned overnight, and his shoes carried the wet scent of damp leaves. Max greeted him with a soft wag of his tail. The lawyer paused to scratch behind his ears before following me inside. "I wanted to deliver this myself," Ellison said, handing me the envelope. "So you know it's real, it's done." I took it with steady hands. Inside were 3 copies of the restraining order, stamped and signed by the county court. Clear as daylight, Kevin and Diana Hamilton were barred from approaching me or the property. Any contact must occur through legal counsel only. Any breach would lead to criminal charges. A heavy weight lifted from my chest. Not relief, not yet, but something firmer than hope, a foothold, a line they could no longer cross without consequences. "They can't try again?" I asked. "Not legally," Ellison confirmed, "not without risking arrest." "But what if they—" I paused, the question tasting sour in my mouth. "What if they do it anyway? Then we call the police, and they'll be arrested." Simple words, but they carried the weight of a family torn apart. "I never thought it would come to this," I admitted, sinking into my chair. "No one ever does," Ellison said gently. "But Eleanor, this is not your doing. They made these choices. You only defended yourself." Max rested his head on my knee, the familiar pressure grounding me as it always had. Ellison sat opposite me and folded his hands. "There's something else. I didn't want to overwhelm you yesterday." I stiffened. "What?" "Brooks, Kevin's lawyer, filed a petition late last night. They're seeking an emergency injunction to bypass the restraining order on the grounds of elder protection." My stomach clenched. "They're still trying to force a guardianship hearing?" "Yes. They claim you're acting irrationally and endangering yourself by resisting professional care." But I have the witness statements, the daily logs, the video footage. I know, and they'll be presented. But the petition shows they're escalating. They won't stop. I looked out the window at the fog curling against the edges of the yard. Somewhere out there, beyond the trees and fences, Kevin and Diana were already planning their next move. Can we fight it? Ellison nodded. I've already prepared a counter motion, and I've requested an independent evaluator approved by the court, not by them. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. When will the hearing be? 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days that would determine not just my right to keep Max, but my autonomy, my dignity, my ability to live as I chose. I'll be ready, I said. Ellison offered a rare smile. That's what I told the judge. That afternoon, I went through the house with a critical eye, not as a homeowner, as a defendant preparing for trial. Every room was clean, orderly. Max's food and water were freshly filled. His leash hung neatly by the door. My medications were organized, labeled, and current. The firewood was stacked safely away from the hearth. There were no tripping hazards, no signs of neglect or confusion. If the court sent an evaluator before the hearing, they would find a home managed with care and competence. As I moved through the rooms, Max followed at my side, silent, watchful. By the time dusk fell, I had completed my inspection and prepared a folder with every document Ellison had requested. My witness statements, my journal entries, photographs of Max's excellent health, a list of our daily routines. I placed the folder on the kitchen table beneath the warm glow of the overhead lamp. It was more than evidence. It was my story, my life, and it was worth defending. That evening, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped into my throat. For one terrible moment, I imagined Kevin standing there, defying the order, forcing a confrontation. But when I peered through the peephole, it wasn't Kevin. It was Mrs. Alvarez. I opened the door, relief flooding through me. I brought something, she said, holding up a covered dish. Chicken pot pie. You've got enough on your plate without cooking. I nearly laughed at the pun, but instead felt tears sting my eyes. You didn't have to. Nonsense. We look after each other in this neighborhood. Always have. She stepped inside, and Max greeted her with a polite nuzzle. Mrs. Alvarez bent down to pet him, her expression soft. They won't take you, boy. Not while your mama's still breathing. The words warmed me more than the pie ever could. As she left, she pressed a folded note into my hand. For the judge, she whispered, just in case. When I unfolded it later, I found a handwritten letter, a statement, clear and heartfelt, about my ability to care for myself and for Max, about the bond we shared, about the danger of taking him away. One more piece of evidence, one more ally. I added it to the folder. The storm was gathering, but so were my defenses. They would not take Max. Not now, not ever. The day after the restraining order was served, the neighborhood quiet was shattered not by the sounds of legal messengers or police, but by a car. Kevin's car. Not parked on the street, not waiting at a respectable distance. It was sitting squarely at the edge of my driveway, engine idling, windows dark. He knew he couldn't legally come to the door now. He wasn't foolish enough to cross that line and risk immediate arrest. But he was close enough to make a statement, to remind me that even if the law forbade him from taking another step, his presence still loomed. I didn't call the police, not yet. I stood by the window, the curtains drawn just enough to see without being seen. Max stood at my side, ears pricked forward, body tense, but still. We waited. For what? I wasn't sure. An apology? An act of defiance? Or perhaps some desperate plea for mercy? But none came. The car sat there for exactly 13 minutes. Then, slowly, it rolled away, the taillights vanishing into the late afternoon gloom. I exhaled, shoulders sagging with the release of breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Max looked up at me, questioning. He's trying to scare us, I told him softly. But we're not scared. And we weren't. Not exactly. Fear was something sharp, something that came suddenly. This was something else, something colder, a constant pressure that never let up. By evening, an email arrived from Mr. Ellison. Kevin and Diana's lawyer had filed yet another petition. They were requesting the court allow Kevin's supervised visitation, not with me, but with Max. I stared at the words on the screen for a long moment, disbelief tightening my throat. Supervised visitation, as if Max were a child in a bitter custody battle. As if he needed to be protected from me. It was a laughable motion, and yet dangerous, because it proved they weren't backing down. They were escalating. When I called Ellison, his voice was grim. They're trying to bait you. They hope you'll refuse in anger, that you'll react emotionally, give them more ammunition for the guardianship hearing. What's our response? Simple. We deny the request. We remind the court that their attempt to seize Max without a court order is still under review as a criminal act. Will the judge side with us? Given the evidence, yes. But Eleanor, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Prepare yourself. They're not going to stop. They've invested too much in this. Financially, emotionally, desperately. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. I'm prepared. The next morning brought no legal messengers, no police, just the mail. A thick envelope slipped through the slot. No return address. My heart sank as I recognized Diana's handwriting on the front. I wanted to ignore it, to throw it directly into the trash. But some small, stubborn part of me, perhaps the part that had once loved her like a daughter, compelled me to open it. Inside was a letter. No lawyers' names, no legal threats, just Diana's words. Eleanor, I never wanted this to get so ugly. I know you think we're being greedy, that we only care about money. That's not true. Yes, we're in debt. Yes, we thought the house would solve our problems. But that's not the only reason. You're declining. Everyone can see it, even your neighbors. Even the pharmacist you think is on your side. They just pity you. You can't keep up this charade forever. We're trying to help. We still love you. But if you don't let us, we'll have no choice but to let the court decide what's best. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Diana Harder. As if I had made any of this happen. As if defending myself against theft and betrayal was some kind of stubborn tantrum. I crushed the letter in my hand. Max, sensing my distress, whined softly and pressed his head into my hip. No more, I whispered. No more listening to their lies. That afternoon, Margaret from 3 houses down stopped by. She carried a plate of lemon bars wrapped in wax paper. Just thought you might need something sweet, she said, but her eyes held concern. I saw Kevin parked out front yesterday. He didn't cross the property line, I assured her, but he wanted me to know he was watching. Margaret pursed her lips, cowered, If Robert were here. Her voice trailed off, but I knew what she meant. Robert would never have let things go this far. Robert would have defended me, defended Max, without hesitation. But Robert wasn't here. I was. And I would do the defending now. Margaret stayed for tea. We talked of simple things, weather, garden plans, her grandson's college applications. But beneath it all was an unspoken agreement. She was here for me. She would testify if it came to that. She would not let me face this alone. By nightfall, the fog had returned. Thicker than before, it rolled in from the east, swallowing the streetlights and turning the familiar into the unfamiliar. I stood at the window long after dark, watching, waiting. No car appeared. No shadows moved at the edge of the property, but I could feel them out there, watching, planning. The family that once sat at my table every Sunday now plotted in the shadows of the law. Max sat beside me, his body warm and solid against my leg. I rested a hand on his head. They think they can wear us down, I whispered. That we'll get tired, that we'll give up. His tail thumped once against the floor. But they don't know us. Do they, boy? Another thump. Steady. Certain. I smiled, though my chest ached. We'll show them. And as the fog pressed against the windows, like a silent, relentless tide, I knew this truth as deeply as I knew my own name. They had underestimated me, but soon they would regret it. The hearing arrived like the first frost of winter, inevitable, unwelcome, but strangely quiet. For all the weeks of turmoil, for the endless letters and threats and shadows lurking in the fog, the day itself broke calm and clear. No clouds, no mist, just a pale blue sky stretching endlessly overhead. I dressed with care that morning. A navy skirt suit, pressed and clean. Robert's favorite silver locket at my throat. Not because I thought the judge would care about appearances, but because I needed armor. I needed to walk into that courtroom not as an old woman fighting for scraps of dignity, but as the woman I had always been, steady, capable, fiercely protective of what was mine. Max wore his own kind of armor, his best collar, deep green leather polished to a shine. He sat calmly as I adjusted it, watching me with those amber eyes that had never once judged or betrayed me. Ready, boy? I asked. His tail swept the floor once. Yes. Mr. Ellison drove us to the courthouse. I sat in the back seat with Max, my hand resting on his broad shoulders. As we passed through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, Maple Street with its aging oaks, the park where Robert and I had once picnicked, the corner store where Max had been greeted with smiles and dog biscuits, I felt a strange calm settle over me. These were not just streets. They were chapters of my life. Kevin and Diana could petition all they wanted. They could draft letters and hire lawyers and twist the truth until it frayed. But they could never erase the decades I had spent building a life of love and loyalty. That no court could take. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Rows of wooden benches, a single long table at the front where Ellison and I sat. Kevin and Diana across from us, their faces tight and drawn. Diana didn't look at me. Kevin tried, but his gaze faltered. The judge entered, a woman in her early 60s, her silver hair coiled in a neat bun. Her expression was unreadable. Good. A blank slate was better than prejudice. The proceedings began with the usual formalities. Petitions read aloud, statements summarized. Brooks, Kevin and Diana's lawyer, stood and launched into a speech about concern and family responsibility. His words were polished, rehearsed, empty. He spoke of love, of fear for my safety, of a desire to help. Not once did he mention the unauthorized attempt to seize Max. Not once did he mention the restraining order. Then it was Ellison's turn. He stood slowly, unfolding his papers with deliberate care. His voice was steady, but carried the weight of truth. He presented the evidence. The video footage of the trespass, the cease and desist order, the witness statements from Mrs. Alvarez, Margaret, Sam, the pharmacist, and others. The journal I had kept, the receipts, the photographs, my daily logs. Finally, he presented the will. The clause Robert and I had written together years before, when we still believed family meant loyalty. The clause that now stood like a fortress wall between Max and those who would take him. The judge listened without interruption. When Ellison finished, the judge looked at me. "Mrs. Hamilton," she said, "would you like to make a statement?" I stood. My knees trembled slightly, but my voice did not. "Your Honor, they say I'm incapable, that my love for Max clouds my judgment, that I've grown forgetful, fragile, unable to care for myself or for him." I paused, meeting Kevin's eyes. But I remember the day my son was born, the exact moment, the sound of his first cry. I remember the nights Robert and I stayed up tending to him, soothing his fevers, teaching him his first words. I remember teaching him to tie his shoes, to ride a bicycle, to face the world with kindness and courage. And I remember, Your Honor, when he promised to protect me, to stand by me, not to take from me. Kevin flinched. I continued, my voice steady. Max has not made those promises, but he has kept everyone I've ever made to him. Loyalty, companionship, trust. He is not a burden. He is my family, the last family I have that has not betrayed me. I took a breath. I do not oppose change. I understand age. I understand limits. But I will not accept lies disguised as concern. I will not accept the theft of my autonomy or my companion. I looked at the judge, my gaze unwavering. I ask the court to honor the law and the truth. Silence followed. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Hamilton. The decision did not take long. The judge ruled that the restraining order would stand. The guardianship petition was denied. Kevin and Diana were ordered to pay my legal fees and were officially barred from making any further claims without new substantial evidence of incapacity, evidence the court doubted they would ever find. The judge's final words struck like a bell. Family loyalty is not a license for coercion. I did not cry. Not there. Not in front of them. It wasn't until I stepped outside into the crisp autumn air that the tears came. Max pressed against me, tail wagging gently. I knelt, wrapping my arms around his neck. "We did it," I whispered. "We're free." His tongue swiped my cheek, warm and solid and real. We drove home in quiet peace. No fog, no shadows. Just the steady, familiar streets of a neighborhood that had witnessed both our trials and our triumph. When we reached the house, I opened the front door. Max trotted inside ahead of me, tail high. The leash hung on its hook, a symbol not of ownership now, but of resilience, of victory. Max lay at my feet that evening as the fire crackled. I stroked his fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. "They thought they could take you," I murmured. "They thought they could take everything." But they hadn't. Not Max. Not my dignity. Not my life. Max was home, and he would stay. The days following the hearing unfolded with an almost eerie quiet. No more letters, no more surprise visits, no cars lurking at the curb. The fog lifted from the neighborhood, not just literally, but spiritually. For the first time in months, the air felt light. The house, once heavy with anticipation and dread, now felt like a sanctuary again. A home, not a battlefield. Max seemed to feel the change too. His steps were lighter, his eyes brighter. He carried his toys from room to room again, dropping them at my feet like trophies. We resumed our longer walks. Down Maple Street, past the park where the autumn leaves had begun to gather in rustling, golden drifts. Neighbors greeted us with warmth. Mrs. Alvarez brought fresh muffins. Margaret sent a note. "If they try anything again, I'll chain myself to your front porch." Not joking. But I knew the quiet wouldn't last forever. Kevin and Diana had lost in court, yes. But people who feel entitled to your home, your money, your life, rarely accept defeat gracefully. They retreat. They regroup. They search for cracks in the walls they once thought would crumble easily. I spent the mornings reviewing the will again with Mr. Ellison, not because I didn't trust his work, but because I needed to understand every word, every safeguard, every possible loophole. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Robert and I had once balanced checkbooks, planned vacations, and years ago, rewritten our final wishes. Max rested at my feet, listening with the same solemnity he had shown during the trial. "There's one more thing I should remind you about," Ellison said, sliding a page across the table. His finger tapped a paragraph I'd read before, but never truly absorbed. In the event of any beneficiary engaging in legal action intended to override the wishes expressed in this will or causing undue distress to the surviving spouse or her designated companion, that beneficiary shall forfeit not only their inheritance, but also any claims to property or assets transferred before the reading of this will. I frowned, reading the lines again slowly. They already lost their inheritance. The judge upheld that. Ellison nodded. "Yes, but this clause goes further." "How?" Kevin and Diana both accepted early disbursements from Robert's retirement accounts over the years. Down payments for their house. Loans for their businesses. They've always treated those funds as gifts. He paused. They weren't. My breath caught. They were advances against their inheritance, which, according to this clause, they now owe back. For a long moment, the kitchen seemed utterly still. Even the ticking clock on the wall paused, or so it felt. "They owe it back," I echoed. "All of it, adjusted for interest." I stared at the page, at the words Robert and I had written together, long before we ever imagined such betrayal. It had been Robert's idea, a safeguard, not because he expected greed from our son, but because, as he had put it, sometimes even good people make bad choices, and sometimes bad choices have to carry weight. They thought they were entitled to everything, I said quietly. They were wrong. And now? Ellison smiled grimly. Now they'll receive a formal notice. Full repayment demanded. If they refuse, we'll pursue it legally. I doubt they can afford to repay it. That's their problem. I sat back, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. Kevin and Diana hadn't just gambled with their relationship to me. They had gambled with their financial futures, and they had lost. "They'll be furious," I said at last. "They already are." The letter went out that afternoon. Certified. Copies to both Kevin and Diana. Another to their lawyer. The final clause. The last nail in the coffin of their schemes. That evening, Max and I sat by the fire. The sun had set early, as it does in late autumn. The house glowed softly with lamplight. Shadows danced on the walls, but they no longer felt threatening, just the natural rhythm of an old, living home. Max rested his head in my lap. His eyes were calm, content. No fear, no uncertainty. I stroked his fur, listening to the familiar sound of his steady breathing. "We did it, boy," I murmured. "We really did." I thought of Robert then, his warm hands, his gentle wisdom, the way he had always thought 2 steps ahead. "You saved us," I whispered to the room. "Even from the grave, you protected us." Max shifted, pressing closer. Outside, the neighborhood lay in peaceful quiet. The same streets that had witnessed my greatest joys and my hardest battles now bore witness to my resilience, to my survival, to my victory. I wasn't naive. I knew Kevin and Diana's anger would smolder for years. But the law had spoken, the judge had spoken, and Robert's final clause had spoken louder than all of them. They had lost. I had won. Not just the battle for Max, but the battle for my dignity, my autonomy, my life. And I knew, deep in my bones, they would never try again. Because this time, the price of their betrayal was not something they could afford to pay. The days that followed were simple. Not easy. Life at my age is rarely easy. But simple in the way that only comes after a long, exhausting storm. When the wind stops. When the waves settle. When the quiet no longer feels like the calm before the next disaster. But something else entirely. Peace. Kevin and Diana did not answer the repayment notice. Their lawyer sent a single, curt reply stating they could not comply. There were no threats, no further petitions, no apologies, just silence. A silence that spoke of resignation, of defeat. I thought I would feel triumph, perhaps even vindication, but I felt neither, only sorrow. Sorrow for what had been lost. Not money, not property, family, trust, a relationship that, despite everything I had once believed was unbreakable. But I was not the one who had broken it, and sorrow could not undo the choices they had made. Max seemed to understand. He stayed close, not out of fear anymore, but out of habit, out of love. We resumed our routines. Morning walks beneath the bare-branched trees, afternoons tending the garden, preparing it for winter's sleep, evenings by the fire, the soft crackle of flames replacing the weight of legal documents and whispered threats. The neighbors returned to normal too. Mrs. Alvarez brought over cinnamon bread. Margaret invited me to her grandson's school play. Sam, the pharmacist, asked if I would teach a beginner's gardening class at the library come spring. Life resumed. Not as it had been before, but as it should be. One morning, as Max and I walked the familiar path past the park, a young couple approached. They had a golden retriever puppy bouncing at the end of a leash. The puppy lunged toward Max in a tangle of enthusiasm. The woman smiled sheepishly. "Sorry, she's still learning." Max, patient as ever, sat calmly as the puppy sniffed and yipped. I watched him, remembering the gangly, awkward pup he himself had once been. All paws and enthusiasm, full of life and promise. Now he was older, his muzzle tinged with white, his steps slower, but his heart unchanged, unshakable, loyal. The woman glanced at me. "He's well trained, and so calm. How old is he?" 12, I said. "But he still thinks he's a puppy some days." She laughed. "That's the best kind of old dog." As we parted ways, I looked down at Max. "You are the best kind," I agreed quietly. He wagged his tail, as if in proud agreement. That afternoon, Mr. Ellison called. "It's over," he said simply. Legally, financially, practically. They've withdrawn all claims. The debt will remain, but given their refusal to repay, we'll file it as a lien against any future assets or inheritance they might receive from other sources. So that's the end? Yes. His tone softened. Eleanor, you did more than protect yourself. You set a precedent. The judge noted in her final statement that elder coercion disguised as concern is a growing problem. Your case will be cited in future hearings. I closed my eyes, a tear slipping down my cheek. That's good. It's more than good. It's justice. After we hung up, I sat quietly by the fire. Max rested at my feet, his breathing steady. I thought of Robert, of the promises we had made, not just to each other, but to the life we built. To protect it, to protect those we loved. Even from themselves, especially from themselves. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the living room in soft, amber light. I reached down and stroked Max's fur. We did it, I whispered. Together. He lifted his head, eyes warm, wise, unwavering. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. No fear, no anxiety, just the steady, comforting presence of my loyal companion at my side. In the days that followed, I drafted a new will. Not because I expected more battles, but because it was time to plan for the future with the same care Robert and I had once shown. I established a trust for Max's continued care should he outlive me. Funds were allocated for his veterinary needs, his food, his comfort, and when his time came, though I prayed it would be many years away, any remaining funds would go to an animal welfare organization that fought against pet abandonment and elder coercion. A legacy born not of bitterness, but of resilience. I did not inform Kevin and Diana. They had chosen their path. I had chosen mine. And Max? Max simply chose to stay by my side, as he always had. Loyal, constant, my reward for standing firm when the world tried to take everything. One crisp morning, as we walked beneath the bare branches of the park trees, Max paused. He looked up at me, his tail wagging gently, as if to say, "We are still here. We have won." And in that moment, beneath the soft hush of the wind and the quiet rustle of fallen leaves, I knew he was right. We had weathered the storm. We had held the line. And now, at last, we were free.